You know, you can choose.
People are screaming for content, and everything's interesting. The amount of crap I watch on YouTube, it's just unbelievable.
No, but it's useful when, say, for instance, you're going on holiday. You know, when I have my holiday in the winter, you know, for me, winter has got to be a long haul holiday to go to the sunshine, and the summer can be Spain or somewhere like that. So when you're going off to a far off place, you want to make sure it's going to be right. So there's always someone that's made a vlog about that.
Yes.
So, you know, you can see what it's like. So by the time I get somewhere, I know exactly where everything is that I want to do, where everything is that I want to eat, you know, and so on. Kind of, it takes away a little bit of the surprise, but I like everything to be organised.
Yeah, but how good is it when you want to go and visit a place and you know where the parking spaces are, or the good shops are, or the good restaurants, or you want to,
and the prices.
You want to learn how to do something.
You know how much to expect to pay. And if
Absolutely.
you go somewhere and you see
how much money should I budget for my holiday in such and such country? Well, I know it's £5 for it, or the equivalent of £5 for a bottle of such and such wine, or it's £1 for a beer, or what, you know, stuff like that. I know how to budget my holiday. It might not be important for some of you viewers. I can understand that. I can respect that, but for most of us, I think.
Well, I'm a bit of a nerd about that. Say, for instance, if I book a villa in Spain, for instance, they won't tell you the address of the place. There'll be pictures of the villa in the gardens and the bedrooms and so on, but they don't tell you the address
so you can Google it.
Your final payment. So I'm a bit of a nerd, and I sit down on Google Earth and actually find the villa, which sometimes can take hours. So I'll search, I'll look at the shape of the pool, and I'll look at the shape of the roof, and I search for hours.
Old habits, I think, Andy. Old habits.
Until I find the actual villa, and I think, it's a great location, the views are great, and so on, you know. And then when we go, I can drive straight there. I've seen all the roads, you know, and it's so useful these days.
Yeah. Well, I think a part of you can't help it. You have to check things out.
In my first book, one of my first experiences abroad was in Morocco, and I can't really say what we were doing there, but
we're on a mission.
Basically, it was to set up a line of communication, and I'll give you some clues off camera.
The camera's rolling.
Oh, is it?
You can tell me afterwards. We were just about to start, and you know, and here you are.
I was there. It was my first ever experience of going abroad in Morocco. Right. I went to Rabat, to King Hussein's palace, where we were setting up this line of communication with the CIA, and I really didn't. He was a nice guy, but I don't like their tactics and their methods.
Right.
And I've never liked Americans. And shortly after, or some years later, I was told I ran 7 agents in the Philippines, and I was told I had to hand over everything I had.
Right.
To the Americans, because we were sharing information and data.
Yeah.
And I said, sharing, that's a two-way thing, isn't it? Most of it seems to be one directional at the moment. Yeah. So I said, so if I'm going to hand over all my stuff, I want something back. And he said, okay, ask for whatever you want, you know, it's fine by me, whatever you want. And I wanted something back about this subject. Which was unofficial, and I knew he could get the information from the CIA. So I contacted him and said, where should we meet? And he said, do you remember my room number in Morocco? Bearing in mind this is about 6 years later. Do you remember my room number in Morocco? I said, yes. And he said, okay, I'll meet you there in Paris. I thought, what the hell is he talking about? So I thought about it. It took me about 5 minutes to work it out. His room number was 404, and in Paris there's a restaurant called the 404 restaurant. Okay. And it's actually a Moroccan restaurant. It was a very clever clue.
So proper James Bond stuff. Proper
So
James Bond
I
stuff.
had to book flights, not really knowing I was going to the right place. And I arrived at this place and the restaurant was shut. And I thought, shit, have I got the wrong place? And then right next to the restaurant was this archway and it went through to this really quite nice garden, given that we're right in the middle of Paris and it's all very noisy. And
Right.
he sat in this garden and because it's closed, we just sat. And eventually the owner of the restaurant came out and said, we're closed. And he said, but I'll get you a bottle of wine if you wish to sit and talk, you know. So yeah, we had a bottle of wine. And this guy basically said, the CIA guy said, okay, we'll have a bottle of so-and-so. And I said, I wanted to take control of the conversation. So I said, no, we won't. You're paying, so we'll have this bottle of wine. And which is more expensive, I didn't say this, but it's more expensive and it's a Moroccan wine, which pleased the owner, you know. I saw him smirk. So, and that kind of thing. I kind of took control of everything he said. I kind of, anyway, so I handed over all my information. It took me weeks to take out all my sensitive stuff because there's no way I'd reveal my sources, and I promised to protect them all my life, and I still do. This is another story. I handed over all my documents in a briefcase which was locked with a code, and I left the briefcase with him. And as I left after the meeting, I told him what I wanted from him, and he said, okay, it might take me some time but I'll find it. And I left my briefcase with him and he said, well, what's the combination to the lock? And I said, my room number. Did the same thing to him, and a month later I phoned him, and it was a very funny conversation because I talked to his wife and it all got a bit rude. And I phoned him and he said, oh, by the way, I can't remember your room number. I said, tough, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
I'll give it to you when I get my information. I said, why don't you just do what Americans normally do, just shoot it or something. Shoot it.
Yeah, talking about the special relationship. The idea behind the show is that you might pass somebody in the street and you might have no clue who they are or what they've done in life. And what they are or who they are might be something quite fascinating. Fascinating like the person who sits down with me today. This is Andy. So I found out about Andy not very long ago. And I was absolutely amazed about his story and who he is and what he does, and especially what he writes about. Andy, you're an author and an ex-spy, aren't you?
I am.
Right, he is. We have the real James Bond here with us. He's here to tell us about his books. He's just got his second book out. Not very long ago. He's going to be presenting himself, he's going to be talking about his books, and he's going to tell us a few stories. Right, I'll say it from the start. You, the viewers, will be rating our guests, and I will be counting the number of likes and the number of shares and the number of comments, and based on that I will be bringing them back. I'm pretty sure I'll be bringing Andy back with his amazing stories. So Andy, welcome, thank you for accepting the invitation.
You're welcome.
So tell us who you are, where you're from, how you got here, and tell us a bit about yourself. How did you become an author? What on earth made you write about your experience as an ex-spy?
How long have you got? My first book.
Right, just to make it clear, these are Andy's books, right? Right, okay, I hope you can see them. They're available on Amazon and they're available on Andy's website, which I will be putting a link in the description below. Please check it out, and obviously I'll be putting a link for you to buy the books because they're available to purchase on all sorts of formats. You will be seeing all the information below. So sorry Andy, back to you. Tell us, how did you get to write
point
these?
out there's a running theme in the book. There's likely to be a third book. They will all start an ordinary guy. So that's easy to remember. First book is An Ordinary Guy, An Unknown Spy. Second book, just out now, An Ordinary Guy, Operation Saponify. And my third book will probably start the same way. So who am I? I'm Andy, born in London. moved out to Hertfordshire, went to Rickmansworth Grammar School, quite unsuccessful there. I left the day I was 16. I wouldn't say under a black cloud. It was against my parents' wishes, it was against the school's wishes, but I saw no point in carrying on with school. So I announced that I was going to leave the day I was old enough, which was in those days 16. I was told I had to inform all my teachers, so I went round to all my teachers to tell them that I was leaving. Some were upset. One particular teacher said, "Andy, that's the best thing you've done since you got here," and so on. So then I went to see the headmaster and said, "Okay, I've done everything I'm supposed to, I'm off now." And he said, "So what are you going to do?" And I said, "Probably go and work with my father. He was just starting a printing business, so I'll go and work with him." And he said, "Well, have you ever thought about working for your government?" And I had no idea what he was talking about. And I said, "Well, I'm open to all offers. What are you talking about?" He said, I'll write to you shortly." And a few weeks later, I had a letter from the British Intelligence Service, SIS, more commonly you'll know it as MI6. I was 16, absolutely green. I'd never written a cheque before, I'd never been to a restaurant before, I'd never travelled abroad before. So the offer was quite interesting.
I bet it was for a 16-year-old.
So yes, I went to interviews in London. It's all in the book. It explains everything, how it all happened. Some of it's quite funny, some very funny events in there, and I ended up being accepted and going off to spy school. And some interesting events happened there as well, which one or two stories in the book. And then I started work, having no clue whatsoever what I'm supposed to do. And I believe I was a bit of an experiment, because normally these kind of people come from Oxbridge, that kind of type of person, you know, with degrees and so on. And I was the first person ever, and probably still, as far as I can find out, totally unqualified at the age of 16. So I am what they made me.
You're one of a kind.
I believe so.
Right.
So I started work with no clue what I was supposed to do, and I went to see...
What was the training like? Because you just glanced over the training, but I'm like...
Well, most of it's
right,
quite...
what's Spying 101? Spying Chapter 1?
Most of it's quite boring, actually. Is
it sitting down, or is it a lot of sporty
it's
type
everything.
and
It's mostly,
shooting and stuff like that?
Mostly learning the process. I can't really talk too much about most of it.
Just tell us what you can
you face exams and various tests.
So you have to be brainy, basically.
One that I recall to you, because it's in the book, and I know it's safe to tell you, this was down in Portsmouth, where you are faced with some of the practical aspects. So in most of the schools is where you learn to do all the paperwork, but Gosport is where you do some of the practical stuff, learn how to follow people, avoid following people, that kind of stuff. One of the tests, everyone in the class was given a task that they had to complete. So it might be something like you have to go and get a complete stranger's passport number, and you have to figure out a way of doing that. And I know it's safe to say this because it's in somebody else's book.
Right.
So for instance, he was given the task of getting the passport number of a complete stranger. So he went in and sat in a bar. Portsmouth and Gosport is a big sailing area, and people are always looking to crew on boats. So he sat in a pub and saw some girls and said, "Look, I'm going across to France this weekend. I'm looking for crew. Are you interested?" And this is how sailing works. And they said, "Yes, okay, we'd love to have a crew for you." And he said, "Okay, for the purpose of the marina in France, I need your passport number, and so on. It's quite simple and quite clever. That's how you have to think. So my task was slightly different. I was always different. I had to plant something blue on a member of my class, which sounds easy until you think about it, because the whole class knows this, so they're expecting me to come along and try and plant something blue, and I had a week to complete the task. So I thought about it, and everybody went about their tasks, avoiding me, making sure they got nowhere near me, and I came up with a plan. And on the day of revealing the results of our tests, it came round to me, my turn to reveal how I'd done the task and whether I succeeded. And before they got to me, actually, we all went off for a coffee, and everybody avoided me. No one wanted to sit with me at the table. So I said, look, okay guys, I realise you're avoiding me. I'll make you all the coffees and you sit down, I'll bring you all the coffee. And so I did all the coffees and went back to the class after the tea break, and they said, okay Andy, how have you completed your task? Have you managed it? I said, yes. They said, okay, who have you planted something blue on in the class? And I said, this guy here. I said, and the guy was like, what have you done? And I said, and that guy there. And that, in fact, all of you, including you, I said to the tutor. And I said, I've planted something blue on all of you. And they're all, well, what have you done? I said, when I made the coffees, I put a chemical in it was basically a dye, in your coffees, and you'll all be peeing bright blue tomorrow. And some thought that was quite funny. Some were horrified because they didn't like to ingest unknown substances. I sprinkled some on the biscuits, so those that didn't have coffee would get some. Everybody took some, and you need about 5 grains of this stuff. It's extremely potent.
But not harmful in any way?
Not harmful. In fact, it's used in medicine. They give you it in medicine to dye your arteries and so on. It's quite safe. I tested it on myself before, and it's hilarious. I took too much, and my pee was as blue as you can think. And next day, everybody revealed that the results were quite successful. So everybody had something blue on them. So I passed the test, but in actual fact, I disagreed with the results. I should have failed, in my opinion. Although I planted something blue on everybody, my opinion is that the whole point of the test is that you approach people and learn how to deal with people, whereas I did it in an underhand way. So I accepted the pass, but in my own mind, I think I should have failed because I didn't persuade anyone to do anything for me.
Quite, yeah. I get where you're coming from, but on the other hand, isn't this what spying is all about?
Well,
underhand,
yes, but
and shady and sneaky and
yes.
I mean, I know it's probably all nowadays. It's probably all cybernetics, computers, hacking, and or most of it anyway. But you need bodies on the streets, don't you? You need people to interact with people. You need people there to get information or to get some sort of stuff.
But the point of the exercise was
interaction with other people.
To get you to do something for me that you don't want to do.
So it's manipulation rather than...
I hadn't done that. So I in my own mind, I should have failed. But it was so hilarious, I got a pass. So that was...
do you think that because you're very harsh on yourself and quite a perfectionist, or you just think back and you just look back and you think perhaps that would have been a way of me getting out of this and not doing this job? Did you love doing what you've done? Did you, looking back now, are you melancholic about it? Do you know what? I actually loved being a spy.
I loved the freedom that there were no set times. Quite often, you'd work 36 hours straight. In those days, the job was different. It was standing on street corners and watching people and following people. These days.
When was this? Just to get things straight for the viewers. So when did you start this? In what year did you start?
1971 I started.
1971. So this
16.
was well over 40 years ago now.
Yeah, and I finished in 1988. So I was in it for 17 years.
Right. So you look back now and you think, right, those were the times when I was a spy back in the day. So are you melancholic about it? Did you love doing this, or you've done it with a sense of, I don't know, patriotism and responsibility towards your
you have to do it
government?
with a sense of patriotism, because the pay is pretty lousy, I have to say. You don't do it for the money,
right?
So it's more patriotism and the thought that you're more or less free to do what you like. I shouldn't really say this, but there are no limits.
Well, sometimes you have to break the law to protect the law.
Yes,
isn't it? Because there was something in the news
I'll
not
ask
long
you
ago.
the question: if you had a chance to assassinate Hitler, would you take it? If you had the chance, I know he's dead and gone, but if you had the chance, would you know, to save millions of people, would you do that?
I know what you're saying, and the answer should be straight away yes, and no question about it. And it's 99%. It comes from me as yes, no question about it. I know what I should have done, but would I have the guts to do it?
So yeah,
that's that's the 1% that I will always think about. Will I have the guts to do it? And if I say yes and accept the mission, will I accomplish it successfully? Because that's a huge burden on somebody's shoulders to say, yes, this is your mission, there's your chance, there's your opportunity, such and such time, you do what, you just follow this plan, very simple, follow this plan and do it. Would I have the guts to do it?
Well, if you had
it's very
the
easy
training,
to say yes when you just think about it hypothetically.
If you had the training, like take all the snipers and so on, you know, they've had the training and they're pretty confident in their work. So if you had the training, and I said to you, go and shoot Hitler, you know, you probably would.
I'm like I said, 99%
you know
sure.
that is the best thing for the world. So
absolutely. No,
that's
morally, my answer is 100% yes. Of course, you know, knowing that doing this will save millions of people and obviously eliminate suffering for many years on this planet. Yeah. But when it comes to actually doing it, I'm only 99% sure that I would be able to do it, even with the training, because you get the jitters.
Yeah.
I don't think any amount of training on a human being will eliminate the human part, because in the end of the day, you are a human being.
I mean,
do you?
Yeah, you watch the film Bravo 20, for instance. You know what those guys did was phenomenal. You know, they're out in the open being shot at by armoured vehicles and heavily outnumbered, 250 to 1, more or less. You know, what they did was phenomenal, and that was their training. They were confident, you know, and brave, extremely brave. And
no, I have no doubt.
Foolhardy, but that's bravery, isn't it?
There's probably a dose of madness in being very brave, because they're not. I don't think somebody being brave is not afraid. It's just learning how to overpower your fear.
I can tell you're very afraid. Trust me, you're very afraid, and you learn.
This is the fear that basically runs the adrenaline.
You learn how to control that, and learn how to control the adrenaline. And in my case, at the end of my career, adrenaline is what I ran on. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here today.
Did you become an adrenaline junkie after 17 years of spying?
No, my career ended because I was in Angola trying to find out. The Russians weren't supposed to be there. The Cubans were there, and we knew the Russians obviously are supplying hardware and so on. And my job was to, disguised as part of a UN mission, there was the UN AVEM, and this was AVEM 1. There were 3 in the end that ended the war. In fact, the war hasn't ended, but I was AVEM 1, which actually failed, and I went out into the field with a team of UN people. I was posing as a Spanish colonel, and so I had to learn very fluent Spanish in 3 weeks to cover, because the British weren't involved in the AVEMS, so I had to get there somehow. The UK team put me in place, and I went out into the field with this team of people, and occasionally I'd wander off by myself to try and find out what Russian equipment was there, and that's when I got caught being somewhere, looking somewhere where I shouldn't be. And to my surprise, the Russians were expecting me. I was caught by this Russian guy.
Why am I not surprised?
Which we'd suffered several moles in the service, and the fact that they knew I was coming told me there was another mole in the service that told them I was there, and they knew exactly where I would be.
Just a small caveat. Before we started shooting, you told me that you think that at the time you were recruited, one of the main reasons they recruited somebody outside the usual pool was because they had too many moles in the department.
Yes.
Do you think that's something that happens in every single secret service around the world?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've recruited them as agents. I was an officer. Most people think of people like me being an agent, but actually I'm an officer and I run agents. So my job normally is quite safe because I get the agents to do the dirty work.
You said you were an officer,
yes,
and not an agent on the street. You ran agents, and
yes,
they were doing the work,
yes,
and you were basically just handling them. Well, you were a handler basically.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. Okay. This is the only thing that I got from reading all sorts of books about spies. So, what's the risk involved? What's the difference between the risk of an agent being on the street and you being the handler or the guy in the office?
Because they're obviously acting against their country. So even in Britain, I think you can still be executed for being a traitor, I believe. Maybe
right,
they've changed it now, I don't know. Yes, it is considerable risk. My main area of concern, I had several areas of concern, some I'm not going to talk about, but the one I can talk about, because everyone will know, is the Philippines. I had agents informing me of the Marcoses, President Marcos. Maybe everybody knows how his career ended, but he went into exile, taking with him millions in money and jewellery. You probably remember his wife, Imelda Marcos. It was discovered she had about 2,000 pairs of shoes and so on. Corruption from an extremely poor country. When you go there, it's shocking how poor people live. And I had 7 agents there, and I think the one reason they were loyal to me is because I absolutely promised them that whatever happened, I would look after them for the rest of their lives, and I do. I still, even today, if they have any problems, I'll help them out, and I'll never ever let that slide.
You have to protect your sources, and you have to protect
absolutely.
them from, obviously, secrecy is a big key of that.
I no longer work for them, but I will still protect them if they ask for my help. That kind of thing. I'll never let them down.
Right. So back to you being in Angola, and basically that was the end of your career. That was the moment when you thought, right, I got out of this alive. I need to get out of this.
I wasn't going to get out of it alive. They took me in custody and interrogated me quite severely, tortured me, beat me up quite severely. It didn't help myself when I discovered the room that I was in. There was no lock on the door. There was only a guard outside the door, and it didn't really help myself when I just opened the door a bit to have a look outside because it's quite dark in the room, and they rushed in and gave me another beating, sat me down at a small table a bit like this one, and actually nailed my hands to the table, and that's not a very interesting experience that I would want to go through again. Eventually they realised there wasn't much they were getting from me, so they ordered these two Angolans to march me off into the woods and shoot me, and stood me against a tree, and at that point I just said, all right, I'm going to die here unless I do something. I'll do anything. So I literally, my hands were tied behind my back, and these people are always drunk, they're always drugged up, they hadn't done the job properly, and I felt this rope becoming looser and I could get my hands out. So I just pushed against the tree and ran straight at these guys, ran straight past them while they were having a fag. They weren't ready, so it caught them a bit by surprise, and I just kept running, and I ran and ran all the way back to where the rest of the UN party had been camped. I'd got back there, and because I'd been missing for several days, found them gone without me, which is very nice of them. Anyway, the owner of the house whose garden we were camping in, which was quite a safe area to camp because he had a garden wall, and he was a really nice guy.
When you say camp, were you in tents or
yes,
something?
We were in tents.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we were out in the field. Most of the rest of the UN were based around airfields, so they had proper, it's in the book, they had proper, almost like towns themselves, these villages where there was hospitals and air conditioning.
Proper encampments.
But we were out in the field, which is exactly what I wanted to do. Go out in the field and look around a bit. We were way on the east side of the country. It was a long way, it's about 700 miles. So I ran through these guys, and they weren't ready. By the time they'd got their guns, swung around and started firing at me, I'm already 30 yards, 40 yards away with trees between me and them. They started firing at me, and I just kept running. One bullet did come right between my arm and my body, went through my shirt, and I've got a scar under here where one bullet literally burnt me rather than, it was more of a graze. Mm-hmm. And the dirt I had on me at the time is more like a tattoo now. I've got this dirt tattoo from Angola under here.
There you go, carry a bit of Angola with you.
Yeah. So I ran back to this house, found my team was gone, and what had spooked the Russians was this small light aircraft had arrived at the airfield where we were camped just outside. And this UNITA base was. That had spooked them. This aeroplane was actually the diamond buyer. The guy's house that we were staying in, he was a diamond miner. He was such a lovely guy, Angolan, and got back to his house where this diamond buyer was in his house, and they were doing their dealing, and I said, look, I need to get out of here quick. And I was told, okay, go to the airfield, try and get into his aeroplane and wait for him. They'll finish their business, he'll come and fly me out. So I escaped out of the house just as this UNITA mob were arriving, went over the back wall, got into the airfield, sneaked onto the aeroplane. He'd given me the keys because it was locked, it was all fully fueled. Given me the keys, and just as I got into the plane, to hide in the plane, I heard shooting start in his house, which was only literally 200 meters away, and I heard this shooting. I thought, well, that's it, I need to just fly out of here. Now, I'd had 4 hours experience of flying lessons, no license, no nothing, but I just thought I just need to go. So I started the plane, took off and flew out, and as I took off, I actually witnessed the people in the house being shot and the diamond buyer being shot, and so then I'm faced with a task. Well, now I've taken off, I'm up in the air, and no nothing, no maps, no nothing, and I've got a 700-mile journey to fly. So I decided the base where the UN team were heading back for was probably about, from memory, it was about 300 miles away. I decided to head for that, stayed low for a bit, and then climbed up to about 3,500 feet, and just from memory set the compass on a trajectory towards this city. And because of my experience, at some stage I fell asleep while actually flying this plane at 3,500 feet and missed the city completely. When, by the time my senses came back, I realised the city was now an hour behind me. Do I turn around? Am I totally lost? I don't know where I am. I'm up in the air. So I decided to keep going the rest of the 700 miles, and I literally worked out in my head that I had just enough fuel to make it. If the wind was against me, I wouldn't have made it. Keep going, get to the coast where I knew I would find Luanda and the main airfield, which is where the main kind of camp was for the UN. And I arrived there just as the engine
was starting to
splutter. Contacted them on emergency frequency and said, look, I'm in distress, I need guidance how to land this thing. And they took me down, and then I landed quite successfully, first time, first solo flight after 4 hours flying experience. And
you got out of there alive. All this information, yeah.
It's all in the book.
I was absolutely hooked, and it's all in the book. Basically starts with the ending, and his editor said, no, that's not right. And Andy, rightfully so, he said, no, this is right, because that's a proper hook. And you could see my face as Andy was talking. I was basically absorbing every single word. Read the book, and you're gonna have quite an experience. When you do so, like and subscribe, and obviously leave me the messages and share this episode for other people to see and read Andy's book. Like we said at the beginning, it's called An Ordinary Guy, An Unknown Spy. And that's the first book. The second book is called An Ordinary Guy, Operation Saponify. You're going to find this even more interesting than the first one. And the third one will come out, we're probably, our head's probably going to explode. Right, every single thing that Andy said about his Angolan experience is in the book. Now tell us, after you got out, because obviously you got out, and you can only tell us so much, you can only say so much, because you had to vet a lot of the information.
I've been very careful not to expose any secrets. The first book is just about me, how I got started, how I got established, and how the career ended, and then goes on like a second half, if you like, what I've done since.
Right. Did you have to actually send this information or this book to be okayed by the MI6, or you just thought, right, this is what has been written so far by people like me who worked for the government?
No, I just wrote it.
So what was your map when you put the information down? What was your
Well, my plan was,
Your plan.
I'll explain why I wrote the book. As an officer, I had a secretary, and the secretary, Karen, was the most amazing person in the world. She was stunningly beautiful. I loved her to bits. And in 2014, I was, after I left the service, because I came back from Angola with PTSD and I wasn't fit to serve, so I left and came to Devon. That's when I moved to Devon. I bought a small business here and had no contact with anyone for quite a while. But in 2014 I had a text message while I was on holiday in Spain. I was sitting in the garden of the villa and had a text message that basically said Karen had died from cancer, and I was extremely upset, and I just burst into tears, and here I am in a beautiful place in the sun by the pool, and my wife just said, what's up, you should be happy, not sitting there blubbing your eyes out. And I eventually managed to explain to her what had happened, and she had no clue whatsoever what I'd done. No one in my family or friends had any clue whatsoever what I did. The only person that knew what I did was my father. And I told him it was up to him if he told my mum, and he decided that was his choice not to tell her.
So basically, nobody in your family, none of your friends, none of your acquaintances,
hence
nobody
the title,
knew.
An Unknown Spy, because nobody knew what I did. I had a cover story. I worked for my dad in his factory, which gave me complete freedom to disappear off for days or weeks or whatever I needed to do. He would always cover for me.
How much was the pressure on your shoulders? How much psychologically? How big was this pressure on you to not be able to tell anybody?
It was quite difficult, but you get used to it. I became very good at lying, and that's part of the job. You have to be able to lie very well. You have to come up with cover stories. You have to come up with scenarios that don't reveal who you are or why you are somewhere. You know, it's part of the job.
Obviously, you have to be convincing.
I'm a very good liar.
Yeah, okay. I understand that you have to be a very convincing liar, but obviously inside of you, you know, there's still Andy, there's still the person.
I could cope with that very well.
And
so I think this is one thing my headmaster had seen in me whilst at school, because I was at grammar school and I never wanted to go there. I didn't feel academically I was grammar school type. I was more practical. Mm-hmm. I think my headmaster was shrewd enough to spot this, and that there's stories in the book about my school days where I'd got up to all kinds of mischief and managed to lie my way out. Quite convincingly.
Later on in life, when obviously this became a skill which helped you in your job, but after that, after you finished with the government, with the MI6, and you started working for yourself in your business down here in Devon, where we are, how were you able to cope with the switching off of Andy and of the normal Andy and the spy Andy?
That was the worst period in my life. I couldn't cope. I had PTSD, diagnosed PTSD, and other kind of problems. I get nervous now. I get all kinds of problems. I'm a totally different person now. And as I was saying, in 2014 I got this message to say Karen had died, and
she was obviously very important to you.
She was very important to me. She was I couldn't have done the job without her. So I just started crying, and my wife couldn't believe what I started to tell her, and I started thinking, well, I need to tell people now what's happened. And so I started telling people, and just nobody would believe me, and I found that difficult to cope with too. I had all kinds of problems, and that was difficult for me to cope with, that I couldn't convince people to believe me. So I thought the only way to do this is to write it down as a complete story and lay it all out.
Did you need people to believe you?
Yes, because I found it very frustrating. In those days, at that time, I would just start crying for no reason, and I actually I did try and commit suicide with my first wife. Fortunately or unfortunately, she found me before I was dead. I sat myself in the car with a hose pipe through the window and tried to gas myself, and she found me, dragged me out. I was unconscious, and I went off to a hospital in Newton Abbot, and again there's a story about that. It's a very funny story. It's not a funny subject, but they wouldn't let me out, and so I had to persuade them to let me out, and I found a very convincing way to let me out. I don't know if you want me to reveal that story.
It is a very difficult subject. I was just thinking, how would you have, say, as a stand-up comedian, if somebody would want to try that, how would you try, suicide, the funny bit? Yeah. Obviously, it affected you in a way that you probably didn't expect it to affect you.
No.
It probably surprised you when you found out that was basically your switch. When you found out that
I'll challenge anyone to stand in front of a firing squad and not be affected by it. Just It affects you deeply, and the fact
I would
that
imagine
I've
so.
failed,
Yeah.
and just
That's why I mentioned at the beginning the 99%. You know, that's why I said I'm only 99% sure I would be able to do it, even with all the training in the world. You know,
Well,
yes,
you
I know
don't.
you can train stuff. You can train the mind. You can train the body. You can basically change who you are, and you can become, I don't know, you can become a super version of yourself.
Yeah.
By with training and everything.
One motto I live by is nothing changes unless you change it. No one's going to do it for you. No one's going to do you favours like that. So if you have a problem, it won't change unless you change it. And this is one of the things I discovered when I tried to commit suicide. The psychological team there were absolutely useless. They had no clue whatsoever. So my mental mindset became that, look, this isn't going to change unless I do something. So from that point on, I became a different person, and nothing will change unless you change it. So
did you become yourself, your real self, or you just changed into a completely different person who you would have recognised, say, 40 years ago?
No, I'm a different person.
Different person
Yeah,
altogether?
yeah.
Right, so if I would have met you, say, 20 years ago or 25
You
years
probably
ago,
wouldn't have liked me.
I wouldn't have liked
No.
you. Right, well, I'm glad I met you then. Well, I'm glad I met you now. I mean, so basically this is how these two books came about. This is how you started writing.
Yes.
To basically
Tell my
unload
story.
yourself,
Yeah,
tell
to
your
unload
story,
myself, yeah.
and make sure your sanity stays with you.
Yes. So I wrote the first book, which is basically the story of my career and kind of what I've done since, and how I've coped with that, because the trauma never stopped. There were, I had a business, and there was trauma in that as well. So the bombardment never stopped coming at me. And then people read that, and they were so enthralled. So many people have said, is there going to be another book? I can't wait. So I thought, yeah, I need to write another book. It's a completely different story. Obviously, the story of my life is known. So now this is like one particular operation and how it came about completely by accident. And it's an operation that could have stopped the Falklands War from happening. But actually, the part about that operation is literally probably 10 pages. The rest of it is how that came about in the first place. What
Right.
happened, and it was completely by accident.
And this is the moment when you tell us how much of these books is actually true and how much is, I don't know, trying to hide the truth. I'm very curious.
Obviously,
because you can only say so much, and you had to pick your words and choose the events, and obviously. So how much of this is true? Because both of them are based on real stories.
Yes.
This is what's the amazing bit.
Oh.
Both books are based on the experiences of a real spy working for the British government, and he had to write these books to basically keep his sanity and make sure he's a functional human being, and that's basically his therapy. So how much of this is true?
It's all true.
And how much of it is avoiding the truth?
No, it's all true. Obviously, there's a lot I can't say. There's places and locations I can't talk about.
No, I should think so, yeah.
But the story's all true. I will be honest and say the ending of the first book is true, but in the book it happened in, how the book ends is happened in 2018. But the actual truth of that is it happened 25 years ago. And the reason for that is I wrote the book, sent it off to the editor, and I was told the story must have an end. When you write or tell a story, it has to have a beginning, a middle and an end. And it had no end. And I said, well, there is no end because it's still ongoing actually. And I said, no, we need you to find a way of ending the book. So
give some closure.
The only way I could end it with closure was to move this story that happened 25 years ago to 2018. And so everything's true, it's just the chronological order of it is changed by that one story.
For those of you who are going to check the link in the description and obviously buy the books, read them and then comment and like this material, and if you like it so much, why not distribute it to your friends and on your Facebook pages or your communities or pages that you like, and let us know what you think. After such an amazing life experience, you're still standing. I just can't fathom this.
Well,
obviously I can't.
If my suicide had been a bit more successful, I wouldn't be, and that was part of the problem. That the psychologists in the hospital kept saying to me, "How's your life improved?" And I kept saying, "How can it get better or improve while I'm here in hospital? Let me go home and I'll sort things out." And they wouldn't let me go. So that's when I had to force the issue, and that's quite an interesting story that's in the book.
Yeah. So this is basically your way of healing yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And the third book, you have to tell us something about the third book, because you are probably patching it in your head now, aren't you?
I am.
People are asking for it.
I see.
You told me they have.
I thought I'd stop with 2, and then I realised there's no word for 2 books. You can have a trilogy, you can have 1 book, you can have a trilogy of books, but there doesn't seem to be a word for 2. So just to round it off, I think there should be a third.
Well, it was really good to actually take the pressure off the discussion just a little bit and change the subject, because it's very, very intense. Every time Andy starts talking about, his previous life, basically, things are getting intense because there's no other way. I don't really think there are any relaxed spies or any relaxed spying stories. I only know one ex-spy, but those of you who probably know more than me, let me know in the comments below. So, you wrote 2 books, and there's a third one coming. Any backlash? Or any mentions?
None at all.
Or any,
yes.
any nods?
Yes.
Okay.
Recently, my second book, both books I announced on Facebook that I've published a book. My second book, when I published that, I announced it on my Facebook page. Said, "Good news, my second book is out there, and you can, where to go to buy it. You can go to buy it in Amazon or directly from me through my website." And almost within the hour, I had a reply from a guy who actually works in the business. He now works at a department in the business.
So he works for the government, yeah.
He works in that business, and said, basically, "I really enjoyed your first book and looking forward to your second book. The family
Right.
is looking forward to reading your next book." So I know that they've read it, and they're going to read the second book and the third book, and no backlash. So
yeah, you've done a good job of keeping you've done a good job of keeping the too sensitive stuff away, or keeping it at bay.
Oh, very deliberately.
Yeah, well, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you here, and I hope to have you back to talk about each book individually. For those of you who have read the book, let us know in the comments how you found it. And for those of you who haven't done so yet, I will leave some links in the description below for you to buy it off the Amazon or Andy's personal website. Like I said at the beginning, this show aims to sit down and talk to interesting people all over the world. I didn't know about Andy 3 months ago. I work with him, and I've seen his face basically on a poster at a bus stop, and I thought, hold on a moment, I know this guy. I've passed him in the street so many times, and I never knew who he is. I never knew his story, and it absolutely baffled me how somebody who most people haven't heard of might have influenced our lives and might have a story that we can learn from more than we can do so by reading a whole bunch of books. And that's not a rare thing. I must say, I've met so many interesting people in my life. Can you think of anybody who nobody knows about or very few people know about and you learn a lot from?
I find everybody interesting, even like yourself, you know, why your choice of moving from Romania to England would fascinate me. And everybody's got different reasons. Usually it's financially or security or whatever.
It's not that for me, but it's a different,
I think you could quite easily sit down and write a book about why you made that choice, how you moved your family here, and how you found a job and a place to live. You know, to me that's just as brave as anything I've done. You know, it's incredible to be able to.
I never had to stand in front of a firing squad. I have to admit, you know, getting on a plane and landing at Heathrow 13 years ago or so didn't feel that brave. It felt annoying and frustrating at times, yes. And yes, coming over here with the contract which I've signed back in Romania and the job was already waiting for me. I had to find accommodation which was suitable because the one offered wasn't. I had to find, you know, various bits and bobs and I have to make a life for myself and my girlfriend at the time, very far away from home. But I don't feel brave in any way, shape or form. Loads of people do it and, you know, they're going to be doing it for a very long time. I think people migrate and people change jobs and relocate all over the world throughout their lives. Right, any words in...
No, thank you for asking me to come along. I've quite enjoyed telling my story. I'm happy to answer any questions. I obviously know what I can and can't say.
Andy, once again, thank you very much for agreeing to sit down and tell your story, and thank you very much for bringing the books along. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much once again. Hope you have a good one. Ta-da!